In the last 24 hours, we've had a pretty massive development come out of Crimea. We haven't had something like this happen to the Russian military since World War II. We have had the Ukrainian military use Storm Shadow missiles provided by the United Kingdom to strike the dry port. It's a port they used in Sevastopol to repair Russian military warships, whether it be patrol boats, battleships, submarines, etc. This was struck with British Storm Shadow missiles, and it disabled 2 Russian warships. One of the Russian warships was a landing craft, a quite large landing craft. I think we actually have a picture of it right here. It's quite an impressive ship. Not anymore, though. It is the Minsk. It is a Rapucha class transport carrier, not a transport carrier, but landing craft, which can carry up to 10 tanks, 340 troops, something that would be quite useful if, say, Crimea was ever isolated by the Kerch Bridge being destroyed and they had to transport troops over the ocean, over the Black Sea between Russia proper and occupied Crimea. It's quite a useful craft for the Russians for that purposes, and so the Ukrainians targeting this makes sense. This isn't the only Russian warship that was destroyed, though. Along with this Russian warship, there was also a submarine, a Kilo-class submarine. It was called the Rostov-Don. I believe it's the Rostov-on-Don. I'm sorry, very bad. The Rostov-on-Don, which is named after the Russian city that was taken over by Wagner a few months ago. It can fire caliber cruise missiles at Ukraine, and it has, along with many other submarines, fired caliber cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities, and could also possibly target Ukrainian transport craft, Ukrainian shipping, grain shipping, stuff like that. And so the Ukrainians have a reason to take it out. And of course, if you disable a dry dock, then you're also undermining the Russians' ability to not only repair warships like this, but also repair other warships as well. The whole reason the Russians say that they want Crimea, one of many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons they use as justification, is for dry ports like this, is for the ability to repair warships like this in Crimea. And the more these ships get destroyed, the more these repair docks get destroyed, the more this type of material, anything related to their Black Sea fleet, gets humiliated, quite frankly, like this, the more it reminds the Russians how much less and less this whole war, I think, means in relation to its original purposes of trying to secure Russia strategic victory with a Black Sea port. That seems like such a small detail in such a large-scale strategic catastrophe at this point. When you talk about the expansion of NATO, the destruction of the flagship of the Russian Black Sea fleet, and the just the gutting of all the armor Russia has built up over the years, losing over 2,000 tanks, and that's just from what has been visually confirmed. But this is just one more element as part of that. I mean, I'm adding a lot of kind of like morally weighted words here, but I mean, this is humiliating. We haven't had something like this happen to the Russian army since World War II. We haven't seen a submarine damage like this since the end of the Second World War. So I do want to give it just the moment of reflection that I think it deserves. Remember, this is supposed to be a military operation. Well, some people say 3 days, and there were some people predicting 72 hours. It was supposed to last a few weeks max. And now we're going towards the end of 2 years of fighting, and the Russian Black Sea Fleet is continuing to take casualties. Here is some video from this getting struck. If any of you were curious as to what it looked like to see history being made. You know what's really interesting, or perspective that I think would be really cool to dissect and interview, even though I don't think I'm ever going to get this interview opportunity. I'd like to interview the Russian nationalists in Crimea, the imperialists, the colonialists who believe Crimea is an integral part of Russia, or really usually they believe all of Ukraine is an integral part of Russia, and that this war was launched to keep them safe. I'd like to ask them if they feel safer now in 2023 than they did in, say, 2021 before Putin decided to pull the trigger on this invasion. Because you have the Kerch Bridge getting blown up like once every few months, with more sections of it getting heavily damaged or just straight up collapsing into the water in some instances, including the rail line getting damaged, even if it hasn't been completely disabled. You've got more and more air defense systems in Crimea being destroyed. We're getting footage released of the SBU. Actually, no, the GUR, led by Budinev, Ukrainian military intelligence, during raids in Crimea, posing with Ukrainian flags as they try to disable air defense systems in the area. We got more strikes on targets across Crimea, including now dry docks and disabling of the first Russian submarine disabled since the end of the Second World War. I would be super interested in asking any of them to make the case that now Russia and Crimea, even though it's not technically a part of Russia, even though they view it that way, if they feel safer now than they did before.
Вот, тут дымарь стоит.
Man, and the thing is, when I see the reactions to strikes like this, it always surprises me just how, number one, how angry people get, because we're about to watch a reaction to this in a moment. How angry people get, right? And how surprised people are. I want to watch this before I make a little cheeky commentary about Elon, which I do want to wrap up the segment with that. But I wanted to make one example of this, because I am constantly pissed off about this, about the surprise people have that the Ukrainians shoot back. I don't know how you expect to invade any country and then look horrified and shocked and get angry at the fact that, oh my gosh, they shoot back. They are willing to defend their homes. They're willing to defend their country. They're willing to do whatever it takes so that their cities don't get bombed. I mean, this submarine can fire caliber missiles at Ukrainian cities. It would be a priority target for the Ukrainians. If you don't have strong enough air defense systems in Crimea, which are constantly getting disabled by Ukrainian military intelligence and the Ukrainian armed forces, then they're going to take advantage of that, and they're going to strike these warships that are bombing Ukrainian cities. It's the same logic that the Ukrainians used to try to attack these ships that were in port earlier on in the year, earlier on in the war in 2022, before Starlink flipped the switch and disabled the drones that were going to disable a bunch of Russian ships in the Black Sea Fleet. Who knows if they would have been successful or not. Either way, though, those ships fire caliber missiles at Ukrainian cities, making them a primary target. Let's watch what Solovyev has to say about this development. Hello. Last night, Ukraine's armed forces carried out strikes with 10 cruise missiles on the shipyard in Sevastopol.
Tanya has donated $5.
They also used 3 uncrewed boats against a detachment of the Black Sea Fleet ships in the Black Sea. He said it in a very roundabout way, but okay. 7 missiles were intercepted by air defense systems. Patrol ship Vasily Bukov destroyed all uncrewed boats. The enemy's cruise missiles... By the way, what they're talking about was the uncrewed boats. It's the boat drones that the Ukrainians use, which they stuff full of explosives and then try to sail them towards Russian ships and blow them up. They have damaged 2 ships undergoing repairs. Okay, now when he says they've damaged 2 ships undergoing repairs, let me see if I can, if we had a photograph. I know we had a photograph a moment ago. I'll bring it up again, because I just want you guys to realize, like, yeah, no, those are damaged. Those are not seen service for at least the rest of this war, if these ships are ever going to be back in service, period. That will be lucky if they can ever get these ships working again, period. But these will not be serving for the rest of this war. Number one, they're not going to be able to get fixed at this dry dock anymore, because this dry dock is now a target. And number two, like, just look at these things. They're effectively destroyed, at least for this war.
находящийся на ремонте. Передает Министерство обороны Российской Федерации 10 крылатых ракет.
10 cruise missiles supplied by Western Nazi scumbags.
Удар по Севастополю.
A strike on Sevastopol with 10 cruise missiles.
10 крылатых ракет. Это только начало.
This is just the beginning.
Это только начало.
This should be understood.
Нацистская сволочь,
The Nazi
британская,
scum,
немецкая,
the British, the French,
американская передаст
and the Americans
ракеты.
will send every kind of missiles, including ATACMS. There's a lot of rumors right now, and they seem to be getting more and more veracity as time goes on. They seem to get more and more credible as time goes on, that the United States government is going to send ATACMS, longer range missiles, to the Ukrainians for them to use this to disrupt Russian supply lines and Russian targets deep behind enemy lines.
И Таурус.
The Taurus, whatever they have. The Taurus is I believe, a German missile that can be launched from a jet. So another long-range missile, though. They have only one main goal: to cause maximum damage to the Russian Federation. Yes, we can retaliate against Kiev and Odessa. But we should retaliate against Berlin, London, Washington, and New York. We should strike Poland, the base of where it all arrives. Okay, can I just talk for a moment about how hypocritical Solovyev is? And I know a lot of my long-term viewers be like, well, of course, Solovyev is hypocritical. He's a Russian state talking head. But just for anybody who might not be super clued in, Solovyev is somebody who very frequently calls for the destruction of Ukrainian cities. And when I say the destruction of Ukrainian cities, I don't mean he's calling for a city to be bombed. I mean he's calling for cities to be wiped off the face of the earth. Every once in a while, every few weeks, he'll call for cities to be destroyed block by block after Russia goes through some humiliating event. Say the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet gets sunk, or there's a failed offensive from the Russians. Something happens, and he'll respond by saying, we need to kill everything in Kiev. We need to wipe the city off the face of the earth. Or he'll say it about Kharkiv, a city that he has said before that he wants to liberate. But you get him angry enough, and he wants to kill everything in sight in Kharkiv. So it's very hard for me to take any type of moral grandstanding like, I can't believe the West provided Ukraine with weapons to strike a obvious military target that we were using to strike their cities. This is an outrage. We should bomb Berlin. We should bomb Warsaw. And he's acting outraged when, if we did to Russia what they did to Ukraine using the ships that were just destroyed, they would be calling for the literal end of the world, World War III. How dare America bomb a Russian city like that? How dare they bomb Russian civilians? Can you see all these hospitals and schools that have been destroyed? And I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying that if other nations treated Russia the way Russia has treated Ukraine, they would be saying it is time for the world to explode and end. And so it's very hard for me to take this that seriously when they were advocating for much more brutal behavior and have engaged in much more brutal behavior towards the Ukrainians, towards non-military targets. So yeah, I'll take the moral grandstanding about bombing major Western cities with a gigantic grain of salt. We should strike factories where all of it is being made. There are no other options. This is war. You know, this is the interesting thing. If you go look at American media about sending ATACMS, and I'll listen to them, it's, well, I don't know if we should send ATACMS because, you know, ATACMS long-range missiles could possibly be used against Russian targets in Russia, and the Ukrainians have pledged that they wouldn't do it, and they have had Storm Shadow missiles, which accomplishes the same thing, but they haven't used it against Russian targets inside of Russia yet. So we have good reason to believe they'll stick by their word, but we don't know for sure, and this could be part of a larger pattern of escalation that we're quite scared of, so we don't know. And even if we do it, we need to wait a three or 4 more months to make sure that we ask as many American bureaucrats and German bureaucrats and EU bureaucrats, it's possible if this is a good idea. You go over to Russian state TV, bomb them all, kill them all, bomb them all, kill them all. And you know what? Don't only bomb them all and kill them all in Ukraine. We should be bombing European cities. Bomb Berlin, bomb Washington, bomb. Just the difference in temperature and dialogue about the war could not be more gigantic. It could not be bigger. Obviously, there's a difference between independent media and state media, and I think this is a big part of it, that the intentions of one media apparatus is not the same of one directly controlled by the government. This is why we still had Western media outlets reporting on gigantic leaks, like from the Jack Texera leaks, where in the Russian press during the Wagner coup, they just, while there was an army marching on Moscow, they just kind of twiddled their thumb and looked at the camera, not knowing what to say because they didn't get an official directive from the Kremlin. So I think that's a big reason why there's this gigantic divide, that this news program exists to hammer support home for the war, and she'll just be as war hungry and bloodthirsty as possible. And maybe if you can convince the viewer to be 1/10 as bloodthirsty as Solovyev, you're still like a war criminal. If you're 1/10 as bloodthirsty as this guy. So if they can get you like 1/1,000,000th, they're good. They got you. Or at least keep you apathetic. Or at least thinking, well, there must be a good reason.
Война, которая
This is war, and its nature is already obvious.
носит уже очевидный характер. Мы воюем.
We're fighting a universal evil.
У нас есть свой список
We have a
предателей.
list of traitors,
Списки предателей,
like businessmen that were excluded from sanctions.
бизнесмены Шульгин,
Alexander Shulgin,
Ахмедов.
Burzgin, Akhmedov.
У нас есть список
We have a list of
предателей.
traitors.
В этот список, естественно,
Naturally, it includes Tinkov
в этот список входят
and many other
много
figures of the
разных
pseudo-culture.
деятелей псевдокультуры. Они не
They aren't
какие-то
foreign
иностранные
agents or
агенты, они
scared
не какие-то
patriots.
неиспуганные патриоты, не
They aren't
хорошие.
good Russians.
Они предатели нашей
They are
страны.
traitors to our country. They were
Оказывается,
relieved of
активное
sanctions
содействие
because they
заставит
provided
освобождение от санкций. Это значит, сколько
active
денег они
support
перевели
and sent
украинцам.
money to the Ukraino-Nazis.
Такова была тайная сделка.
That was the secret deal.
К ним относятся Ходорковский,
This includes Mikhail Khodorkovsky,
к ним относятся Пономарев,
Ponporov, Budkov,
начиная от Волкова,
from Leonid Volkov to,
заканчивая...
what is that creature's name? I can never remember it.
Но как зовут этого гнома?
What is the name of that gnome with tits?
Господи.
Lordy.
Британская
The
разведчица.
British spy. You know, I will say, I do enjoy watching Russian state media more than I enjoy watching North Korean state media. Because when I watch, like, North Korean state media, there is, like, a clownery about it that's very fun. Just like the great and powerful Kim Jong walked through the great and powerful rice fields that were giving great and bountiful rice to the great patriotic peoples of Korea, who are on a one-way path to reunification. I'll see that, and there's like a clownery about it that's kind of funny. Can be kind of fun to watch, right? But there's kind of a laid-back type of stoner, like, bigotry and tomfoolery that Russian state TV engages in that I love, where Solovyev constantly is bickering with his staff, and he'll do it live on a show, just randomly, like, you fucking ignorant fools, if they, like, get a cut wrong, or they put in the wrong clip, constantly bickering with his staff, constantly forgetting what he's trying to say. He'll randomly, like, go off script and start cussing, or start saying, like, random bigoted things. The only person that's worse than Solovyev about this was Strelkov, Igor Girkin, and his podcast, which wasn't on Russian TV, not with as many criticisms he made of the Russian military, not because they were murdering Ukrainians, it was because they weren't murdering Ukrainians enough. But his show was even better, because he'll, like, be talking about, yeah, the Surovikin line. So they've got the trenches, they've got the tank ditches, they've got the Dragon's Teeth, and, you know, I was looking at the Dragon's Teeth, and it reminded me of the teeth of the vicious Jew, which is the real enemy in this war. And it'll just, like, randomly just go like 180 into the most anti-Semitic rant you've ever heard in your life. A lot of Russian TV is like that. A lot of it. And a lot of Russian, like the hardcore nationalist podcasts are like that. And I call them the hardcore nationalist podcast, but I mean, Strelkov was the defense minister for the Donetsk People's Republic, so it's not that unknown.
Певчих.
Mira Pevchik. Pevchik, that's it. Pevchik is the known with tits.
Да.
Yeah.
Тут народ стал возмущаться.
People are objecting.
Да ты каблуки сними.
Take off her heels. Suddenly her height disappears.
Гном не имеет отношения.
Gnome has nothing to do with height.
То, что люди
People
не
aren't
понимают.
grasping it.
Гном может быть любого роста.
A gnome could be of any height. Is he arguing about designating his gnome insult because people disputed his gnome insult because of height purpose? Okay.
Да.
Is he on a downer? I don't know. I saw. Yes. I don't know, man. He seems a little out of it.
Да.
Like that was just like a moan. Okay, whatever.
Гном
A gnome can be of any height. Dude, he's talking about gnome tits. This is the equivalent of like Russian Tucker Carlson when you're talking about like scale, size, popularity. Like he's a gigantic name in Russian state TV or just like Russian news generally. And he's just like moaning and talking about gnome tits. Like the first 3 minutes was just bomb every major Western city. And the second half is gnome tits.
Ну вот. Ситуация.
How did we get from British cruise missiles being launched at a Russian port in Sevastopol to gnome tits? I just don't know when the transition happened. The situation is very unpleasant, extremely hard.
Я считаю, что вот это
I believe that this war can't go on with their hands tied.
Конечно, не может продолжаться.
10 cruise missiles. You know, this reminds me when I was a kid. I remember when I was a kid, I played volleyball in elementary school. I must have been like 5, 6, or 7 or something. It wasn't volleyball. It was tetherball. You know, I don't know if you guys ever played tetherball, but you have a ball connected to a string connected to a metal pole. And the goal of it is to wrap around the ball around whatever side you're supposed to. So I'm trying to wrap it around the left side. The other person's trying to wrap it around the right side. And when I was little, anytime I would lose a tetherball, I remember I would say something along the lines of, well, I wasn't really trying, you know. I only used like 10% of my tetherball abilities. Now I'm going to use 20%, and then I'd lose again and be like, okay, well, I was only using 20% of my tetherball abilities that time. This time I'm going to be using 40% of my tetherball ability. Then I'd lose again. Well, okay, you don't understand. That was only 40% of my tetherball, and I'd just keep doing that, and I'd keep finding like a new percentage. Like I'd get all the way to like 90%, and I would be like, well, that was only 91%. Like I'd always find a way to find some excuse as to why I lost, and I wasn't really trying, even though I was like drenched in sweat, like dry. He'd be like, oh, barely even trying, right? This is what it feels like from the outside. It just feels like me reviewing my childhood right now.
Ракет. Не случайно.
It's not a coincidence that we noticed. Foreign reconnaissance gathering over Crimea. Dude, he's on something. I don't know what he's on, but he's on something. He is not sober.
Цель выбирали.
They were selecting a target.
Они выбирали цель.
That's that.
Вот так.
And now the weather.
Погода и время Голованова.
Wait, there's more? I think the weather is ideal for the strikes against the decision-making centers. And slur for Ukrainian stan. Okay, so if you want to know what he said kohol, which is like a slur for Ukrainian. I don't know how to describe it. I hate describing anything as the N-word of another language, but that is how Russians use it. The defense minister said, if there is a missile strike, we will retaliate against the decision-making centers. It's time. It really is time.
Вот просто пора.
Greetings, Vladimir. The weather in the zone of the special military operation is certainly favorable. The eastern wing of the anticyclone is advancing. This is practically working weather, except for the easternmost regions. The most important centers of the Banderite Ukraine are exposed, and the skies of them are clear. Okay, you want to know what's going to happen, though? They're not going to strike the decision-making centers. And the reason they're not going to strike the decision-making centers is if the Russians are having trouble fighting the Ukrainians and taking over Kiev, I don't think they would want to start a situation that could see them having to not only try to take over Kiev, but Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Finland, Sweden, Norway, the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, France, Denmark, Hungary, Romania, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Like, I mean, how much can they take on at once? Netherlands, Belgium. Like, how are they going to pull that off? So that's why I'm not particularly worried. Even when the things that worry me the most is human error. It's not the Russians constantly making a decision, I want to start World War III. It's something just going wrong. And when you look at the Cold War, it was those instances of like high stakes negotiation where human error intervenes and it could make something go wrong. That's the stuff that scares me the most. Not, well, the Ukrainians have bombed one of our ships for the 7th time now, and 7th time's the charm. We're going to start nuclear war with no warning. Yeah, no, that doesn't concern me at all. It's just posturing on Russian state TV. But even if I don't buy it, I'm not the only one that has been paying attention to this. Elon Musk has been paying attention to this as well. As many of you guys know, Elon Musk has been in the news recently because it broke due to a biographer recording many parts of Elon Musk's life that there was an operation early on in the war where Ukraine was using an earlier version of those boat drones that they've been using to harass and destroy Russian warships. They were doing an attack on the Russian Black Sea Fleet while they were ported and docked in Sevastopol. And while that operation was ongoing, the support that they were using, which was Starlink, that was a communication system they were using to communicate with the drones, was turned off. Then the story came out that actually it wasn't turned off. It was never on. And the Ukrainians requested for it to be on. That's what Elon corrected. And then the biographer agreed. But then we got Ukrainian sources coming out saying, actually, that's not the case. It was on. And then they tried to launch the operation. And then after they tried to launch the operation, they found out that it was turned off. And that's when they requested it to be turned on. Which, I mean, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know which specific scenario is most likely to be the most accurate, but that one makes more sense to me. And now we also heard, and I don't know if it's mentioned here in the section, Elon Musk's new justification was that sanctions on Russia actually made it so he had to keep it off to comply with US law. Now, that just sounds like a bunch of horse hockey to me. That sounds like a bunch of nonsense. I'm not buying it. It almost sounds like he's making it up as he goes. But putting all that aside, I wanted to talk about his reasoning as to why he either shut it off or kept it off or whatever he did, depending on your interpretation of the events. I want to give Elon as much of the benefit of the doubt as I can, even if I don't necessarily think I should be giving him the benefit of the doubt anymore. Anyway, his mentality about this has been that if he was to allow Starlink to be used for the strike on the Russian Black Sea Fleet, that would have been an escalation in the war, an act of war, and he said before that this could cause World War III, and he didn't want to be part of that. And it's been suggested that he got this idea after talking to Russian government officials, which he told American government officials, and apparently Ian Bremmer a while ago, that he was talking to Russian government officials, including possibly Vladimir Putin, which he has denied, but other officials, American government officials, are counteracting that, saying, no, he actually told us he did talk to Putin. So he had this whispered into his ear, and then he got concerned after having the Russian side shown to him. And so then he started to pull, he wanted to pull that military support, or Starlink being used in that military capacity at the moment, and he didn't want World War III to start. That was his logic. Let's play a recent explanation of his logic, and then let's talk about that in reference to the strike in Sevastopol we just saw.
At the time this happened, the region around Crimea was actually turned off. Now, the reason it was turned off was, actually originally was because the United States has sanctions against Russia, and we're not allowed to actually, and that includes Crimea in the sanctions, and we're not allowed to actually turn on connectivity to a sanctioned country without explicit government approval, which we did not have from the U.S. government. So,
man, I really don't know if I buy this. I don't know if I buy this, man. Definitely if we're getting also other reports that it was on, and then they found that it was turned off later. But, I mean, impossible to read his mind. It's just, it seems like an important piece of information that's being dropped a little bit after the fact. Like, wow, this is a really convenient new piece of information. But, I don't know, maybe I'm just being cynical.
So basically Ukraine didn't give us any advance warning or heads up or anything. We just got the sort of urgent calls from the Ukrainian government saying that we needed to turn on Crimea. It's like in the middle of the night, basically. And we're like, what are you talking about? You know,
You up?
What's it for? And then, we basically figured out that this was kind of like a Pearl Harbor type attack on Sevastopol.
A Pearl Harbor-like attack. I don't know what he means by this. When I first heard this, I was trying to decode what he meant, because in the American psyche, and Elon Musk is very proud of being a newly minted American citizen, right? And he talks about it a lot. And when people were asking about, his loyalties around this whole scandal, that was something he brought up. Like, I defend America. And he was very patriotic about it. But as an American, as I was always taught, and this is how I grew up around Pearl Harbor, is the main thing that really pissed off America was the deceit and the sneaky nature of what happened. Like, oh, war was not declared, but there were Japanese planes bombing American ships in Hawaii. And only after they disabled much of our fleet did they declare war. And that, and that kind of painted how we characterized Japan for the entire war. And the Japanese style of warfare is very, like, sneaky and underhanded. And it somewhat played into, like, previous stereotypes as well. But the whole idea, or the reason why Pearl Harbor was so notorious and it was a day that would live in infamy, isn't just because it was like a base that was on the sea that was attacked, right? Because then any naval attack or any attack on any naval base would be a Pearl Harbor-esque attack. The thing that made Pearl Harbor special is that it was an unprovoked sneak attack. Those are the two things that made Pearl Harbor so infamous. Number one, this was definitely not unprovoked. The Russians were using the ships that they were trying to disable to bomb Ukrainian cities. And so from the Ukrainian perspective, people can call this an act of war or violent, or whatever they want to call it. They're shooting back at what is directly bombing and killing their civilians, right? So certainly not unprovoked. And when we say it's a sneak attack, it's a sneak attack in the way that they didn't want to be caught. They wanted to catch the Russians by surprise. But it wasn't there's no war, and then all of a sudden there is war, and we didn't warn you about the war, but now we're attacking you before you know we're at war. They were already at war. The Russians attacked, and the Ukrainians then did a sneak attack, not by not warning the Russians that, war is between them and doing some type of underhanded move like that, but by simply trying to attack their fleet. So I don't think it has really any resemblance to Pearl Harbor at all, outside of the fact that Pearl Harbor was a naval base and Sevastopol is also a naval base. That's the only similarity between the two attacks. They didn't even use the same weapons to do it. The Japanese used, fighter planes and bombers, and the Ukrainians wanted to use essentially remote control bomb boats
On the Russian fleet in Sevastopol. So they're really asking us to really proactively take part in a major act of war. well, we certainly have huge support for the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government is not in charge of U.S. People or companies. That's not how it works.
And Elon, if I could just,
But I should say that.
Maybe it's because I've been in Ukraine so long, but it's hard for me to imagine any military operation taking part in any part of this country without some facilitation from Starlink. Starlink has embedded itself very deep within Ukraine's communication infrastructure. It's a very useful system. You take a satellite dish, you point it at the sky, and you've got connection. Jerry-rigging that thing on top of cars. I know people who are designing car cases so they can just hap it on the top of their cars. They drive around with constant internet access. That some of it's like bulletproof in order to stop shrapnel from disabling it. Because the thing about Starlink satellites, and this is the thing they don't tell you, is they're very fragile and easy to break. They are extremely easy to break. Whatever the Ukrainians are using it for, they're using it a lot. And so it really feels like the whole country gets hooked on Starlink. People make death-defying deliveries to the front line, getting these systems to the units that need them. And then once everybody is hooked on Starlink, all of a sudden, oh, we're not going to warn you. And he's complaining about not getting any warning on this. What about the time he cut out services for Starlink during military actions without any warning? That could have gotten Ukrainian soldiers killed. It's not like all of a sudden Starlink was called upon to be involved in the war. That happened on day 2 of the war when Fedorov, the digital minister, asked for Starlink and Ukraine's and Elon's support. And he said yes. And ever since then, all the way up to when the strike happened, Starlink was being used by soldiers in military operations to talk to the command, to stay in contact with their commanders, to communicate. It's been actively used in the war ever since it was introduced into the country. And so this all of a sudden, like, I don't know if I want Starlink to be involved in the warfare, then why did you say, okay, yes, I will have my system be sent to the country at war to resist the invasion? It just sounds like he got second thoughts about this after having the Russians whisper in his ear, and he tried to find an out, and he found one. And since he didn't have a contract with the Ukrainians, which was always my main critique of the deal that the Ukrainian government had with Elon, is that at any point he could pull the rug out from under them. And then what happened? We pulled the rug out from under them multiple times.
Although I'm not President Biden's biggest fan, if I had received a presidential directive to turn it on, I would have.
It's like if I was, like, let's say I took like my tires and I work at a tire company and some construction company is like, oh, we need tires. And I give my tires to them before we sign a contract. And then once they've gotten the tires on all of their cars, I'm like, okay, this is great, but you cannot use these tires to transport nails. We're a construction company. What do you mean we can't use your tires? We can't use any of the vehicles with these tires to transport nails? Yeah, no, that's our new rule that we're instituting a month into the construction process. No transporting nails with these tires. No bueno.
Done so because I do regard the president as the chief executive officer of the country. Whether I want that person to be the president or not, I still respect the office. And so if I gotten a request from the president type of thing from the American president, to be clear, then I would have turned it on, So, but no such request came through.
that's a really interesting point. And what Chamath is referring to is you're now being attacked. I saw there was Jake Tapper the other day on CNN interviewing our Secretary of State. He was all lathered up, basically attacking you for this. David.
To his credit, Secretary Blinken was actually quite supportive, despite the absurd, accusations and leading questions of Jake Tapper on CNN.
Yeah, he didn't take the bait, to his credit.
To Secretary Blinken in this regard for not, taking the bait at all.
Yeah. Well, to me, this is an example of no good deed goes unpunished. Because if you had never given,
I hope so.
I hope when I'm interviewed, every once in a while, the interviewer just says, Dylan, you're a fucking prick. Fuck you. I hope so, because if I'm ever in an interview and it's this buddy where I'm getting like my shoulders massaged this much, like I almost like I don't even like, oh, I saw this interview the other day and someone dared to question you. Can you believe that? I can't believe that. I know, that's just so disgusting. I just like, come on, man. Just like, come on. He's the richest man on the planet. He can take a critique from Jake Tapper. But last thing I want to wrap this up with. The complaint that this attack on Sevastopol, on the Russian bases in Crimea, on the Russian fleet was going to start World War III, could escalate the war. God forbid, what if the Russians invade Ukraine? That'd be crazy. All of those doomsday scenarios, none of those came to pass. This strike on the Sevastopol dry dock is just one more example of this. But this isn't the only example. The Russian Black Sea Fleet has been attacked multiple times. Hell, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet was sunken in 2022, was sunken last year. Multiple other Russian ships have been sunk and damaged since then. And now a dry dock in the first submarine of the war has been damaged, probably to never return, at least during this conflict. All those doomsday scenarios turned out to be nothing but saber rattling, and it feels more and more, if he really believed those doomsday scenarios, as was whispered into his ear by Russian government officials, then it sounds like the devil's whispers played him, man. He had those whispers in the ear, he got seduced by it, and it played him. That's what it feels like to me.